to a special edition of our Today in Woburn show. I'm your host, Samantha Stone, and we have elections coming up, and I'm so grateful for all the candidates who have been participating in our interview series. We want to have a series of dedicated discussions with the mayoral candidates, and I'm so pleased that Omar has joined me today. Welcome, Omar.
Good morning. How's it going?
Good. Thank you so much for this a little bit longer conversation than we generally get to have on the show. And I'm so glad that we can do that. You know, we chatted, I don't know if it was weeks or months ago at this point, but way back at the beginning of the campaign
Yeah,
when you had first decided to run. And I know lots and lots of things have happened since then. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing to ready yourself for the position of mayor should you get elected.
sure. So something that's been huge since we've last spoken was door knocking. Knocking. Since we've talked, over 5,000 doors that we've knocked on. And I think that's incredibly important for anybody running for office because it is one of the best ways to get information from the people, to listen to the people, to make sure people feel heard. You're coming to where they are at and absorbing what they have to say, their grievances, their concerns, their what they want to see in an elected official. And so being given the opportunity, I take it up immediately. I mean, I'm young, we have the energy, so we get out there, we knock, we talk, we gather data, and it allowed me to build eventually, like you say, prepare myself for when and if I'm elected to office. So door knock has been huge. We've hosted a couple events. We had a kickoff campaign party at the high school. That one was awesome. We had a lot of people come out. We also had I'm not sure when exactly we talked, but we had a Horn Pond cleanup at some point early on. It was super cool to see people that was, I guess, like the first campaign event. That was super cool. And people came out. We went around the pond for about an hour and a half, 2 hours just cleaning. And it was super cool to have the people there. We decorated some rocks and left them in different places with positive notes. It was super sweet. And then we had a 5K that we hosted at Horn Pond. That went amazing considering the weather. It was pouring rain on us that day. But people still came out. They still ran. We still had an amazing day. And at this point, it's just been knocking. We have the debate coming up Monday. We're about 12 days away from the election. So it's really just been getting in front of as many people as possible and talking to them about what they want to see and also what I believe I can offer them as a candidate and as an elected official.
So I have a lot of questions I want to ask you because I know you've been, honing in and understanding what's important to you. But I'm curious, having spoken to, or yourself or through your campaign, thousands of people across the city, which is a significant portion.
Yeah.
What surprised you about what you learned? I'm always curious the things that might have surfaced that you weren't expecting.
Mhm. A couple things that weren't immediately a surprise to me, but something that you can kind of be like, oh, wow, was the fact that a lot of people aren't familiar with who their elected officials are, how the process works, how they can get involved in the process. I guess it kind of leans towards what I'm really pushing in my campaign, which is transparency and education. And when I say education, it doesn't always just mean within the walls of the school. Education applies to the whole city, just educating people and helping them understand and also learning myself. So I think that's really surprised me when people don't know who their city councilor is. They don't know how the breakdown works between a counselor at large. They don't know that the terms are 2 years, for example. So different things that are new to people who have just moved to Woburn or have seen recent shifts and changes, things that, especially with kind of what happened in the last few years with COVID and with the schools, a lot of times your main concern is kind of what's happening in your home, your own family, what's happening. And sometimes we're even focused on the bigger picture, what's happening globally, what's happening in the federal government. And a lot of times we kind of forget the local level when essentially, like Chip O'Neill, like all politics is local. So I think that's really surprised me, but it's been amazing getting to get there and just being able to explain to these people. And they're impressed and they're amazed. They say, wow, this is so cool. I've never had anybody come to my door. I've never had anybody explain to me how the process works. And they really appreciate what I'm doing. And I appreciate them for their time to come outside, especially when it's a sports game, they're having dinner, they're having people over, and they're standing outside talking to me. So it's been amazing process, but there's definitely a few things that I see day to day that I would love to change once in office.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a really good observation. I think important. I personally believe, obviously national and state level politics and policies are important to our lives,
Of course.
but day to day, the things that, affect our immediacy of what's happening in our households, really the local representation is a piece of that. So it's interesting for me to learn how many folks maybe don't know that and haven't engaged with it. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to grow as a community. I
100%.
want dig in a little bit. I know you've talked about, I'm going to read this because I want to make sure I'm quoting you correctly. And
Okay.
you stated that if elected mayor, you'll invest in our youth education, take care of our essential workers, and ensure that we have an economy that works for all. I don't think anybody would disagree with those things, right?
Of
Those are
course. No,
pretty,
how could you?
right? Those are pretty good things.
Mm,
As you've looked at and studied the current fiscal year budget, as you've
mm,
looked at, sort of digging into, I'm sure, some of contract negotiations and things that have happened in the past, what changes would you make to realize that vision?
sure. That's a great question. And a lot of times when I think we look at politics and candidates, sometimes even maybe in the national level, I mean, we saw a debate last night. Sometimes it is really a fist fight, but I think what I'm seeing right here, right now, it is not a fist fight between myself and the other candidates for this office. And so, kind of when I speak about what I want to do, it's not diminishing anything that Mayor Galvin has done the past years, right? We see his fiscal sense and everything that he's built. And essentially what I look at is a new approach to things because what he's done is working and it's built a strong base. And I think now it's time to view things in a different way, innovation and fresh ideas. And so something that I look at immediately is the way we handle our budget, the process around it, who has control over, who can add, subtract, who can touch it. I think that's really big because it allows for checks and balances. If we only give the power to one person or one group of people that don't have anybody else who can sort of go against it, I think it's a tough thing to combat because if one person says this is going to happen, or if it becomes personal at any point, it's going to go that way. And I don't think that's representative of a true democracy. Another thing that I think I'm really, really looking forward to is hiring a grant writer in the city of Woburn. I think that would be something that would change the way that our budget functions. It's essentially money that has already left the pockets of our taxpayers. And a lot of times in Woburn, when we say taxpayers, we're talking about property tax, but I'm talking about income tax, federal and state tax that has already left the pockets of our citizens and can now be reinvested into our city. It can be brought back through a grant writer. I mean, I can see anybody justifying an $80,000 salary in exchange for $4 million revenue annual. So I think that grant writer is an absolute necessity in the city of Woburn. It'll change the way that we view the budget. It'll change where and why we can allocate certain funds and allow us to really approach things from a new perspective. I mean, the AAA bond rating is something that is really powerful and it's the highest rating given, and we can utilize that along with having grant writers. There's no reason that the two of them have to be mutually exclusive.
Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that we have been able to achieve for multiple decades now, right? So from the last few years is relative to the rest of Massachusetts, our tax rate is relatively low. It's not the lowest for those of us who pay it. It doesn't feel low. And I fully recognize that we have a pretty diverse economic community in Woburn. And by no means am I implying that it is an easy burden to fill. But it is still been a principle in Woburn to largely not raise that.
Of course.
Sometimes doing the things we want requires us to take in more revenue. Grant writing might be one way of doing that. Increasing revenue, either commercial or residential, is another. How do you feel about the property tax rates, which is really the one that we can affect, and the commercial tax rates, and sort of your philosophy on maintaining or adjusting that?
I think it goes back, like you just said, the grant writing. I will say this up front, I'll say it right now. I'm not an advocate for immediately raising our property taxes on our citizens. It's out there now, people see it, now people know it. And I think that's somewhat of a debunked myth that the only way to increase certain city services, teachers, police, fire, is to increase property taxes. And while there are citizens who are willing to do that, I don't think that it's always equitable. The people who are willing to do that can sometimes afford it more than other people. There are people in the city, regardless of their status or who they are, who can't afford a property tax raise. There's a lot of seniors on fixed income who can just barely make it through month to month. And to ask them to raise it, they would eventually be out of a home. And this is where they grew up. This is the community that they were part of, that built them up, that they built up. So right off the bat, that's how I feel about property tax increases. But we need to look at alternative revenue sources. It doesn't always have to come from solely property taxes. They build that such a strong base. Like I mentioned, Mayor Galvin has established.
Thank you for those of you who are watching. You've probably noticed there's a different background here. Omar was really patient with me because there was a wasp in my office where I was originally taping, and I'm allergic to wasps. And to avoid requiring an EpiPen or my just total panic and not being able to focus, I have moved to a new location and locked the wasp in my office. So Omar, thank you so much for your patience as we've made this quick change.
No issue.
One of the things I want to pick up on, so we started to talk a little bit about tax rates and
yes,
not everyone can afford it. One of the things that we have in our state for sure, and probably many other states, but certainly in Woburn, is what I would deem an affordable housing crisis. We have a lot of new housing being built, but I wouldn't consider most of that housing affordable, even though technically they're meeting the legal requirements around affordable housing. It's really tough for a lot of working families, a lot of seniors and others to be able to do that. My own adult children live at home because, you know, the thought of the rent that they would have to pay to move out, plus, you know, I kind of like having them around. I don't mind. But, you know, it when we look at what it takes to find a starter home or what it takes to do rent, it's really increasingly difficult in Woburn. And we've always had a mixed community of people in our city of different income levels.
Of course.
As mayor, what are some of the things that you think we can and should be doing to address that challenge?
Yeah, great question, especially because it's something that hits home for a lot of people, including myself. I mean, I know I have a few years, but I don't think I would be able to afford Woburn coming back in. It's scary because a lot of people are used to that. It was a thing where, you know what, you get raised here and eventually you go to school or you go into trades or you go into whatever post high school kind of approach you take and you come back to live here. And it's really amazing to be able to do that in your home community, and it's somewhat sad to see that that isn't as much of a reality as it was. So something that I want to point out is you said they're meeting the minimum legal requirement. And I think that's what is something that a lot of people talk about, because when developers only have to put a certain percentage of homes, make them affordable, or apartments or units, then the other ones can be as luxury, high end, expensive as they need to be. And you don't have what eventually was supposed to be affordable housing. 40B is designed to be the fail safe. It is not supposed to be something that we should strive for. It's not something that we should be proud of. I think that it comes down to holding the developers accountable, but it also is bigger than that. It's a zoning issue as well. It's not something as simple as waving a wand and I suppose just pressing them about, hey, what about this? What about that? Because at the end of the day, developers looking to make as much money as the most amount of money that they can make. That's what they're doing. So I really think that it becomes a conversation revolving around zoning, around developers, development fees, impact fees, meaning fees that we hold or take from developers who are coming into the city and use it to put up public services. So, for example, if XYZ company wants to add XYZ units here, then they need to give in exchange to the city, pave the street over here or put up new traffic lights because it's a safety issue. But when we do that, we allow them to have what they essentially want to build, and we also allow our citizens, the people who live here currently, to be taken care of, essentially. And so it's not just a Woburn issue. Like you mentioned, it's a statewide. So it really is a crisis, and it's something that I would 100% take on. And it's something that I would advocate for on the state level because it's not as simple as Woburn just fixing it. There's no silver bullet, there's no magic wave a wand and everything gets fixed. So it really does become, is this candidate, is this person in office going to be a champion for advocating for this? Are they going to fight for affordable housing? And I'm definitely going to do that and doing it in a way that allows me and the people to have a sense of home in Woburn, not a, oh, this is a temporary thing. I can't afford the mortgage. I can't afford the rent long term. So that's definitely my game plan going into it.
Great. We talked a lot about developers. I want to switch and talk a little bit about businesses. So this is important to us, A, because we have a pretty healthy commercial base in Woburn, which is
Yep.
a significant amount of revenue, a significant amount of jobs. And there are things that we do to attract businesses to Woburn, and there are things we do to support those businesses once they get here, particularly the small businesses that we have in many parts of our community. What are some of the things that you would like to see as mayor do to support those businesses who are here for us?
So I'm very big, very, very, very big on small business support. And that's something that I feel not necessarily is better, but we prioritize in a way our citizens, our Woburn citizens, people who live here who also want to have a business here. And I think something that I would do is creating a more streamlined process in terms of the business permit, in terms of steps on how to get what and where to get where. And I think doing that while also increasing the support within City Hall, we just hired Casey Haggerty. She's in economic development. That was a huge step. And I applaud City Hall and leadership for doing that. And so now it's important to continue that. It's not just going to stop there. It's going to be a consistent ride. And it allows us to grow our business base, which in turn also reduces the burden placed on our property taxpayers, citizens, the residents, and will also have people feeling more invested in the community when they have their own business. And it was a thing. I mean, I've only been here for 19, 20 years, but people tell me, I hear, especially at the doors, they're telling me 40, 50 years ago, oh, my neighbor had a donut shop over here. I know my friend had this place over here. And it was, not only was it cool to see, but it also brought the community together because it's a local shop where you could feel better about giving into it. And the corporations, of course, they run a lot of things and they're helpful in terms of commercial tax rates and whatnot. But there's a sense of pride when it's a local Woburn citizen owned business, small business that you can feel a part of, that it feels like home. And a lot of times when you know them on a name to name basis, when you get to see them day to day, it really makes you appreciate it. I mean, there's a few small businesses that we're familiar with in Woburn that a lot of people can appreciate. The Studio Cafe, Boston King Coffee. Those are people where you know the owners, you get to see them day to day, and you could go to a Dunkin' Donuts anywhere in Masters, but you choose to go there. We have a few Dunkin' Donuts in Woburn, but people still actively make that choice. And just, I think building that support, making it a transparent process, not having to jump through unnecessary hoops, making it a fair and equitable process will allow us to thrive as a city.
Thank you for that. One of the other things that I think is a challenge for businesses and for some of the new housing developments where people don't always have a car, and they're sort of designed intentionally to be around like near the train station. And that works great if you want to go to Boston. Not so great if you want to go to Woburn Center or the library or, lots of other parts of our community, even to the movies. What are, some of the ways we might be able to support those local businesses, by maybe addressing a little less need to drive, but for those who maybe don't have a car, figuring out how to make these other parts of our community more accessible to everyone?
So you're bringing up transportation, which I think is important. I spent some time in Boston and I didn't have a car there. I was getting everywhere and anywhere I needed to get to using public transportation. Now, while I'm not advocating for running a green line, red line, blue line all through Woburn, I think it's important we have a couple bus routes in the city, and one of them comes from the Orange Line, Wellington, and it goes straight down Main Street you're coming all the way from Main Street to nearly Wilmington Main Street. So I think that public transportation is something that's important because now that we have all these new apartments, condos that are being built, not everybody in them has cars, not everybody wants to drive around. And especially with the traffic that we've seen the last few years, I think that transportation is absolutely needed. We have a T station, like you mentioned, but you still need a way to get there. It's behind Target, but you need a way to get there before you can take the train to wherever you need to get to, which is only really Boston, North Station. So I think that it'd be important to see what we can do with the MBTA. But of course, they're under their own, going a lot of changes, and a lot of things are happening within statewide MBTA. So just working with the state legislator and everybody who's a shareholder essentially, and making sure that we get out what we need for the city of Woburn, which I think is possibly more bus routes. I know a lot of people even would appreciate that, being able to take a bus from this part of Woburn to this part of Woburn. Like you mentioned, you can't get to the center. There should be something that allows people to get there. It also would reduce traffic a little bit because there are people who don't want to drive but feel like they need to because they can't get around the city. So if we were to put even two more routes in, it would take hundreds of people a day. And that's even like 50 to 100 cars off the road during especially 9 to 5, busy work times and times where people are driving constantly around the city. I think that would be massive.
Excellent. One of the things I want to talk about is sustainability. So we as a city have done some investments in solar,
Sure.
obviously environmental care, open space projects and things all are top of mind for us. When it comes to creating sustainability in Woburn, what are some things as mayor you would like to see us explore or embrace?
That's awesome. A couple things that I even just today, of course, everyone is on social media, but I scroll through and I see there was a big group of people talking about bees. They won. I'm sure you must have seen it too. Like there was a lot of people. One person said, "Hey, what do you guys think about this?" And a lot of people were into it. And so I think that having some type of group that is, it could even be citizen based. I even know personally that there would be people who'd volunteer for that position and allow them to kind of take in ideas. Of course, we have the community garden, but just something that allows people to give in. And that's on a sort of small level, but on a larger level, I look at things like solar, for example. Like you mentioned, I know we have some investments in solar, but there's different alternatives to where we put solar and how we obtain that. I think it would be pretty important to cut down on some of our electricity use in terms of where we spend the money. I think it's an upfront investment where you pay the money for solar, but in turn, in a couple of years, you start seeing that roll back. You start seeing electricity bill get cut. Of course, there's zoning and laws that surround certain places where you can and cannot put solar. But I think that a great location would be on top of certain municipal buildings. I think that if that's legally, if you have the right to do it and you have the ability to do it, I think we should be doing it because it would cut down on electricity cost, as well as just making us a greener city. I think that what we saw with certain projects where conservation land gets used, I think that it's important to make sure that we're protecting it because that's essentially what it was designed for. So I think there's a few ideas. I mean, I just keep on coming out and spin them out, but to me, they loop together. It's all one thing. It's really listening to what the citizens want, to the people see, and also making sure that we're protecting, defending the fiscal sense of the city. Because, of course, it'd be great if we could give everybody $1 million, but then you have no more city. So I think that it's important finding a middle ground between the two. And the first step of doing that is by listening to people.
We talked a little bit about this when you first ran, but I think it'd be irresponsible if I didn't bring it up again.
Okay.
You are less experienced than the other candidates, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does, I think, weigh in a lot of people's minds. When the questions that people said to me is like, "How are you going to handle a multi-million-dollar budget? You've probably never managed anything other than your own checking account, or are you still in school?" So let's just hit that head on one more time, if you don't mind. Let's just clear the air and help people understand your point of view and what you are bringing to us.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to take that on head on every time I'm at the doors. I can't really avoid it. It's not so I can put a mask over, but I am 19. I am young. I don't have as much political experience as my counterparts. However, I see that as a benefit. I see it as youth engagement. I see it as somebody who's not tied to the ways of doing things, that are not boggled down and held back by how we used to do things 30, 40, 50 years ago. What happened 50 years ago is not what's happening now. It's different. Times are changing. We need to keep up with that. And it's only going to be doing a disservice to the people to be tied in with old ways. I think that there's a way to bridge that gap between the generations and understand that it isn't one way to do it. There isn't a bunch of ways that we have to mutually exclude. We can all come together and take ideas from what has been set up from the people 100 years ago we still use, the charter that was set up even before that. So adding and building these blocks up is important, because if we only cater to one time period, we won't ever progress as a city, as people. So I think it's really important. What I bring in is fresh ideas that aren't held back by prejudices, by biases built through experience within the political field. And it also offers a genuine, authentic listening hand and ear, because these are people who have lived in the city much longer than I have. You've probably lived in Woburn longer than I have. And to draw from your experience and everybody else's experience forces me essentially and allows me to bring all this with me to City Hall. It's not just about me making decisions on behalf of people, it's me making decisions for the people. And that happens by listening to all 42,000 people and taking what they say, taking their experiences, taking what they care about, and bringing it with me to City Hall. And to answer the school question, when I was at Woburn High, still as a senior, I enrolled at North Shore Community College. And it was there that I was bouncing between Northeastern and North Shore, kind of seeing what classes can I take here, what credits will you accept, what will you transfer. And so my goal at the time, that was before I even got into the office of the campaign, of course. That was very early on. That was 2022. I did not want to take a 5-year approach to Northeastern, which is what their traditional thing is. They do the co-op, which a lot of people are familiar with. But if you're not, it's a 1-year co-op, which means you work and you don't go to school. You do your 4 years, but you sprinkle in 6 months in between. So you end up doing 5 years. And I didn't entirely agree with that. So I decided that I was going to cut it short. And it's not very traditional, but not a lot of stuff that I do is. So I enrolled, took the classes, and just took as many credits as I could, skipped as many courses as I could, which allowed me to now be on a track to graduate with my bachelor's degree in 2 years. Not 2 years from now, but 2 years from when I started in September of 22. So I will not be juggling school and the mayorship. I've already completed all my business courses at Northeastern. I have the equivalents of associates and more. So at this point, it's really just elective courses. I'm really picking and finishing off. And I think that the way I view it is anybody else who works a full-time job with who's plus they're raising a family, but they're also taking a course here, a course there. They're taking their master's, they're getting their PhD. We see our teachers doing it all the time. We see police officers as well completing schooling while they're still working full time. And police, they're working overtime hours. So I really see it as an opportunity to focus on the city, to focus on the job, and complete my remaining 7, 8 courses as they come one by one.
Thank you for just making sure everybody understood the plan and the context. I think it's very, very helpful. I did take some master's classes when I had babies and worked full time.
Exactly.
I would not envy doing that again. I didn't end up finishing my master's. I decided to have a career change, but certainly lots of people do it, and it is a very, very doable thing. You don't need to be in school full time, which is, I think, what most people's primary concern was.
100%.
Thank you for clarifying that. Let's talk a little bit about infrastructure across the city. So obviously we have a very big water infrastructure project that is planned funding. We are, getting support for that from outside grants and things. We will still have to contribute to it, but it's not really an option. We have to do that. And we have recently opened a new fire headquarters. But there are always an incredible amount of demands on our infrastructure and capital projects. And it takes a long time to pay them down, even with, good ratings and such. So my question to you is, if you think that there's a couple of priorities, great, share that. But I'm really more interested in understanding the process you go through or would go through to prioritize and decide which infrastructure projects we invest in. in what order, because obviously there will always be more things that we could do and perhaps want to do than we can do at one time.
Of course, yeah. I'm a big numbers guy. Business administration is my degree, by the way, with my concentration being in finance. I've been a banker for 3 years now. So numbers, numbers, numbers. And that means budgets, that means looking at data. So I think something that is huge is data and surveys, sending those out and seeing what is critical in terms of this data. So it means listening to the people, but it also means looking at the numbers, and the numbers will kind of speak for themselves as to what is required here, there, when, where. For example, there was a survey that was done that said that this was about 10 years ago, that said that Woburn required at least, with the size that we were at the time, at least 3 ambulances in the city. And we just signed on to our second 24-hour one this year. So I think things that are important to me in terms of project, in terms of investments, it would be based off of what the city really needs, what is considered a safety issue, essentially, because it's one thing to be fiscally responsible, but when you're prioritizing dollars over people, it becomes a safety issue. And that goes in terms of the ambulance I just mentioned, and even more things with kind of what we're seeing now with the schools and what we could have done to be better equipped. So for me to prioritize what I would put first, it would be based off of, firstly, what could be potentially harmful towards residents and addressing that and facing that head on. Then moving on to,
I just want to ask you a clarifying question, because
Hmm.
There are multiple ways, and I'm not passing judgment on anything. So just to be
Okay.
clear for those who are watching
Sure.
and forming a question, I just want to make sure people understand. There are multiple ways to get 3 ambulances. One of the ways is that we staff and fund and buy and do 3 ambulances.
Correct.
One of the other ways is what we currently do, which is we have 2 ambulances that are owned and operated by our own staff. And then we have service that we bring in on a third, as needed. Sometimes that may be 4 ambulances, or there's so I'm not saying it is or isn't a safety issue, but I worry. I just don't want people to think we don't have backup plans. First of all, I think that's really important. But more important, I want to understand from your point of view in that example, because you raised that example, is maybe the data said we really should have our own. I don't know. I didn't read the report you have. So I just wanted to, give you an opportunity to talk through that one a little bit more.
Okay, yeah, sure. So yes, to clarify, it is not that we only have access to 2 ambulances, and if those 2 are out, then good luck. That's not the case. You're correct. We have third-party services. We also have a mutual aid agreement with some people in the county. So that means we'll borrow ambulances from Winchester, Lexington, and whoever else can provide us one when we need one. And that especially includes whenever we need life services on an ambulance, because our 2 are not equipped with it. So when I'm saying what is required and what is necessary in terms of public safety, yes, you're right. There's not only one way to do things, but it's important to realize that as a city, we want to actually provide aid as well to people who are outside the city. And that means having our own ones that we have accessible to us, because to tell somebody, hey, hold on, we need to go borrow one to see if one's available from this city, and that's bouncing between dispatchers, and that's minutes. That's time that is imperative to somebody's life in case they're in that situation. So I think that just having these conversations that I've had with the firefighters in the city of Woburn, it would be a relief on the people of Woburn. It would be a relief on the firefighters and the people who serve if we supported them in that process. And so that was my clarification too, specifically the ambulances.
No, and thank you for doing that. And I think and I'm not saying we don't need 3 ambulances. Maybe we need 5.
Yeah.
I don't have a point of view. Certainly the firefighters and the people who serve this. I think what I heard you say, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, is that today, some of the decisions we make today are financially based. Like, what does it cost for us to run it ourselves full time versus fund, a third-party service when we need it.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is there's also a community aspect and a people aspect of this that is equally important to account for and not just the financial piece of this when we're making decisions like that. Is that a fair summary?
Correct. Yes. So I definitely think that, I mean, like I said, from a business perspective, I 100% understand not just throwing money away. 100,000% understand that. But it does come down to the safety of people working, the people running into fires, and also the people who are in situations where they need and require an ambulance support.
Yeah. Are there other examples that you want to chat about? Anything? I don't want to cut you off from that discussion.
In terms of
Other infrastructure, or sort of just how decisions get made, how you think about making decisions like that. So let's talk about other decision making we make. I think when it comes to public safety, not to say that's an easy decision, but it's an easier decision than some of the other decisions that we need to make, because safety is a very, clear thing that we need. We all care about. We want to make sure people are cared for. Let's talk a little bit of like public schools, for example, because I know that has been a topic of lots and lots of discussions. We all struggled as a community with a teacher strike during the contract negotiations. Nobody wants that to be ever repeated again. When you think about public schools and how we fund that, what are your thoughts on where we are today and where we should be?
Sure. So I think that that's something that my youth also speaks to, that other candidates can't. I see what it is inside these classrooms, and I think that's important, because when you only see a line item, you only see a number associated with it. You don't see what that number really contributes to, how many students they're affecting, what they actually do day to day, and how important that line item is. So I think that there are certain things that we are losing this upcoming year that I would not agree with. I think that one of the most important things in a society, in any community, big or small, is the education, whether it's a proper structured public school format or not. Education is number one. Like I mentioned, that's number one for me. It's number one for my campaign. It's number one for what I want to take on. So when I see kind of what we're cutting and what we're reducing and changing, I don't think that's the way that I would approach it. I would look at it from more than just line items. I would understand what it is, and that comes with establishing really good collaboration with the school committee and having them establish really good collaboration with the teachers and the superintendent, because if we only take the perspective of people who are not in the schools, we can't make decisions that are informed. We're making decisions based off of what we know. And that's not anybody's fault, because if I don't share from it or you have a biased perspective, it's going to skew things. So it's definitely, you have to judge based off of what's in front of you and what the situation is. And it's a case by case thing. It's not like one time that you could fix it. But I think that I would be more willing to put money into the schools. I think that's number one for me. I think it's number one for any place. I don't think that at any point we should pride Woburn for meeting or being at the bottom. I think that, of course, everybody in the community wants Woburn to be at the top, wants our schools to be at the top. And I think to get there, we have to make these investments. They're important investments that require and enable the people in those schools to do what they need to do to make sure that our students are performing at their highest level.
Thank you. I could keep talking to you for another hour, but I promised I wouldn't do that. So I do want to just give us, in summary, an opportunity for you to just, sort of speak to the voters of Woburn and, share anything you'd like to with them about your candidacy and why they should vote for you.
Yeah, I'm giving the people an opportunity, a candidate, a position, a person who's willing to listen to them, who's willing to make sure that citizens feel like they are heard and that their message rings in the halls of City Hall, because that is what a leader should be doing. That is what somebody who is a public servant should be doing, serving the people, listening to them, taking them what they have to say, and then making the decisions, the tough decisions that people sometimes don't agree with. And I think that comes down to listening to the general consensus. And I think something that's important to that is increasing the voter turnout. That's something that I've really been pushing, is voter engagement and community engagement. It's important because we can't get a true taste of what the community wants if they don't come out and say it. So I think establishing and making and creating that bridge, increasing voter engagement, community engagement, youth turnout, making sure that everybody who is a shareholder in this community feels that way and they have that opportunity. They have somebody to go to. And that's why I want to establish a full, transparent, and accountable government under my leadership. I think that's the only way to really build a strong community where people have a sense of pride in what they do and what their neighbors are doing and can put in and know that they're eventually going to get something out. And that's what my eventual goal is for Woburn. And I believe that I am the candidate who brings that change, who brings that leadership into the mix. And that's where my youth comes into play. Like I said, I look at it as a good thing. And I urge people to consider what I'm saying and come out and actually vote, right? Like increase the voter turnout. If we got to 50% of registered voters, that'd be beautiful. And so I think that it's important, even if it's not for the candidate like myself or somebody else, make sure you're coming out and voting, right? Because your voice can only count if you allow it to. We're 12 days away. I think the debate on Monday will be very amazing. I think we'll see a packed auditorium in there. I think we'll see people who are starting to tune in because of things that happened this last year, not just in Woburn, but generally across the country. But we need that turnout every single year. We need that turnout every single election because then with a bigger body, we have true representation of Woburn's democracy, of what the people as a whole want. And so that's what I'm really big advocate for. I believe that is why people should vote for me, is because I understand what it is to be a voice that sometimes doesn't feel like they're represented, like they're not heard. And I'm offering that to people as a candidate, as an elected official. And so I urge people to check out what I'm about. My website's omarforwoburn.com. I urge them to come to the debate on Monday, and I urge them to register by Friday. So I don't know when this is going to get released, but register to vote the 25th and come out and vote September 5th.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you so much for your time today, Omar, and answering all of our questions. And Woburn, as always, continue to take good care of each other, but also go vote, because this is an opportunity for us, both in the primary and then in the November election, to have our voices heard. And here's the beautiful thing, Woburn. We have multiple people who care enough about our community to do a really hard thing, which is to run a campaign. And we are fortunate to have choices. And so I encourage us to have everyone learn about those candidates. I hope these shows are helpful in that process, but get out there and vote.
100%.